All right, guys, here we are with Rob Brennan from Sony. Rob, I'm going to say it's not just a pleasure to have you here, it's an absolute honor to have you here. I've actually been pretty starstruck and when I met you in person and at the different events that we've been at together. Can you please just say hello, introduce yourself, and tell everyone what you do for Sony?
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. And I'll tell you, I appreciate that, but it's really my pleasure to be here. It's exciting to get together and be able to talk, about Sony and about technology, and share a little bit. So about me, my name is Rob Brennan. I'm the technology manager for home entertainment and sound. Our home offices are based in San Diego, but I work remotely in Texas. And essentially my job is to support all of Sony electronics over North America. So that's the kind of continental United States, as well as Canada. And home entertainment and sound refers to all of our consumer video and audio products. So television and projectors, as well as receivers and sound bars and headphones, and all of those products, ultimately, I'm responsible for supporting. And what I essentially am tasked with doing is in some ways being kind of a front man, for Sony. I work a lot with our kind of PR team to do demonstrations, to give interviews, but I also work extensively with our product planning and engineering team in Tokyo. So the other reason I really am happy to be here is, the feedback that we get not only from customers, but from influencers and from reviewers. I'm able to take that information, take those conversations back to our Tokyo engineering team and talk about what the industry is saying, what customers are saying, what we'd like to do in the future, and work with them to develop kind of product plans year over year as we move forward across all of those platforms that I support. I've been with Sony for about 12 years, and yeah, I absolutely love it. It's a lot of fun.
Well, when I first met you, shout out to our good friend Robert Zone at Value Electronics. I met you at the first shootout that I attended about 4 years ago.
Right.
And our conversations, as I was supposed to be filming, every one of those could have been an amazing video. And even the things that we spoke about, I always wanted to digest and then put out there. And I realized I got to get Rob on at some point. And we had talked at 2 different shootouts. And I saw you recently at the projector shootout. And congratulations, by the way, where Sony has won the 4K shootout with the A9G Master Series, A90J Master Series, and lastly with the A95K QD-OLED. And every conversation we had, the way you broke down everything from QD-OLED to micro LED to blooming, I've never heard described on our platform before. So we're going to cover some of that if that's okay. But again, pleasure to have you on. And, I've met your team. And the way you break it down is just, I think it's something that everybody would love to hear about. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that I really missed you at CES. And I know we want to touch on that briefly. We have plenty of Sony fans on this community. It is one of the largest watchers of our community. And I know a lot of them are concerned. So if you can give them just some broad strokes that you guys are going to have some TVs this year, that'd be great.
Oh, sure. No, it's a great question. Essentially over the last couple of CESs, we started to change a little bit of what we envision for the show and what we want to really present publicly at that show. Over the last decade, since I've been with Sony, we certainly have had years where it just was a product lineup. Here are all of the new TVs this year and the new Blu-ray players and the new cameras and the new headphones, and it really was like a Sony exclusive shopping experience. And obviously there's some benefit to that. But under our new CEO, the focus has really been about what Sony means on a larger scale. So we talk about our partnerships, of course, with Honda, with kind of the EV space, with the new Sony satellite that was launched, our partnerships with cinema and filmmakers, and other ways that we're trying to push technology in general forward in a way to benefit customers and society kind of in general. I can absolutely confirm that just because we didn't show new FY23 TVs at CES does not mean they are not coming. They absolutely are. We have a separate announcement planned where that information will be made public. Unfortunately, that's not today. That would be great if I could give you that scoop.
Yeah, that'd be a little early.
But Yeah, we just wanted to change focus a little bit, with CS in terms of what we really are showing, explaining to people who we are. Because for a lot of customers, they look at Sony and they say, "Oh, well, that's the company that made my PlayStation," or I have those Sony noise canceling headphones, or I have a Sony TV, or whatever. But Sony is a massive company with a lot of different technologies and partnerships that we engage in kind of across the board. And so we want to remind kind of customers in general and the industry at large who we are, what we do, what we can bring, and some of the unique kind of Sonyisms that are enabled by that far-reaching kind of ecosystem.
Well, a lot of the signature of Sony is, accuracy, picture quality, filmmaker, the Master Series lineup, especially. For me, being an LED fan, I'm very happy to see that many LEDs are still here, obviously with the Z9K, the X95K. And can you tell me just a little bit about Sony's signature? A little bit about, is that something that they do? And we think that that's something you guys favor. Is that something that Sony in general likes to go after? Is the accuracy? Is that really their motto in a way?
It absolutely is. For as long as I've been with Sony, kind of our underlying goal post, let's say, has been creative intent, right? How do we faithfully recreate the creative intent at home? And that's not to say that other manufacturers don't care about accuracy, sure, right? But Sony has a very specific way in which we define it. I tell people all the time, Sony's not interested in making a better TV. We want to make a more accurate TV. I don't know what better is supposed to mean. Better is subjective. Yep. Better is up to each customer to decide, is this better than that, based on their own needs and preferences and biases and budget. They're going to make that determination. But what we absolutely can definitively define objectively is what is more accurate. But it's also self-serving. Don't get me wrong, right? Sony makes a lot of the professional broadcast equipment, right?
Yep.
We built cameras famously that Jimmy Cameron used to make first Avatar, and we had to build a whole new camera system so we could do Avatar 2 and Avatar 3. And of course, then there's the work we do with Sony Pictures, the professional broadcast monitors that are the gold standard that are used across the industry. We make not only for ourselves, but for everybody else.
Yeah, and that's so the monitor, the BVM is the one we use, right? Is that the Sony monitor? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the master monitor that we use at the shootout as kind of the referee. So we're not saying, which skin tone is better, but it's which skin tone is more accurate. And then we're using the reference monitor to say, this is target. So which is closest, to target. So that's how we identify accuracy. And it absolutely, is our mantra. The other thing I'll point out is this concept extends to our entire lineup. So yes, there is an ability of an A95K or an X95K as kind of higher end TVs to get closer to that reference than, let's say, a Sony entry television. But the entry television is still on that specific path, and it goes as far as it can based on the limits of its hardware. But that's still the goal, is still reference, creative intent, accuracy. That's who we are. And that's who we really want to speak to kind of in the consumer space.
Awesome. I mean, and I know we've talked about gaming a bit, and that's something you guys still consider to be a strength for you, whether it's a game optimizer, a game bar. When you guys look at accuracy, even in a game mode is still a priority above all else.
Yeah, absolutely. Game modes are especially kind of tricky. You can build into your processor, and Sony processors are kind of well known for how advanced they are. They know what things are supposed to look like, but the rules go out the window as soon as you start looking at video games, because a game director can decide that their game world is going to look like anything that they can imagine in their minds and create in a virtual space. They can say, no, this is what my world looks like. And so it becomes incredibly important to be able to faithfully take that signal and then recreate it with the limited amount of adjustment as necessary, because I'm not certain what look they're going for. They are madmen and women out there making these games, and I love all of them, right? So, gaming accuracy movie accuracy, sports accuracy. That's, really, what Sony is kind of going for. Now, that being said, we recognize that not all customers are obsessed with that, which is why,
Yes.
just like any other TV manufacturer, our TVs have built-in picture modes, right? So you
Yep.
can, as Spinal Tap famously said, these go to 11, right? You can push it a little bit if you want, a brighter, more intense kind of, color or contrast. You can get that experience. But our first passion is for accuracy.
And just to touch on that movie, I love when he's like, "Yeah, but these ones they do 11." He's like, "You can just raise the volume, but they go to 11." I'm glad you touched on the presets because I know it's something you and I discussed. I think a strength of Sony is also those presets. I find that I don't have to change the picture mode often, but I do know, and especially in our arena with the influencers, a lot of arguments about, well, it has to be in film for picture pro for filmmaker mode and whatever. And we spoke that Sony's standard mode is excellent, and that some of our communities feel bad about leaving the more accurate picture modes. But can you speak a little bit on that? Because that processing does help. And we talked about that even at the shootout, sometimes calibrating things. And at least I feel this way personally for LEDs, especially the Z9K, that sometimes that calibration can knock out some of the extra power that I think makes them stronger against the OLEDs.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And I'll start with this. Movie directors, directors of photography, cinematographers, they're pretty conservative when it comes to kind of color palette and dynamic range. Just because we have HDR now doesn't mean that they've changed the way that they light and shoot TV shows and movies. And of course, live sports is live sports, right? Where's the sun? And there you go. And so, oftentimes your television, your projector, your whatever is capable of producing a lot more than the somewhat, again, conservative, limited, choose your descriptor there, vision of kind of the director. So you can, of course, put the Sony televisions in custom mode, which is our most accurate out of the box, picture mode. But here's my thinking on it. I love accuracy. All of my TVs, I have a lot of Sony TVs in my house. They're all in custom mode like all the time. That's who I am personally. If you as a consumer are like, yeah, I know I'm supposed to like it like that, but I prefer standard, my response to you is, God bless you, and do what you like. If that's what you think makes you the happiest, then that's what you should be watching. Don't let someone else tell you, no, your TV has to be calibrated or it has to be in this mode. Or if you prefer a certain look, then that's the look that you prefer, right? And there's a clear distinction between a performance-based conversation, which is typically what Sony's having, which is more objective, and a preference-based conversation, which is more subjective. And the nice thing about the Sony TVs is that you can have a high level of confidence that let's say your favorite film is Aliens, and of course it should be, right? And so when you watch Aliens, you want to see exactly what the director intended, so put it in custom. And then when you switch over to Netflix, put it back into standard and enjoy yourself, right? Get blown away by the spectacle. No one's going to judge you for that. It's all good.
And what's cool, and what takes us into we'll jump back into what we were just saying about HDR impact. A lot of us thought that HDR was a filmmaker's tool. And you and I spoke on, initial HDR was just tacked on. Let's just take you're telling the filmmaker, hey, you have to start using this feature. I thought initially it was organic with filmmakers and projectors. And you're saying that they were kind of hard they just started kind of pointing cameras at the sun and say, okay, there's your HDR shot. Let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone who's been around this business for a while will remember, like when 4K first came out, right? There was a lot of content shot where the motion was terrible because the directors of photography, the cinematographers had to learn how many degrees can you turn per frame before you start having motion blur problems or tearing issues or weird artifacting. If you watch some of the old school like horror movies, you can see the rubber bat and there's a little fishing line and they're dangling above, right? That's Dracula in bat form. because you could never see that of the resolution at the time, but you
Yeah,
can
yeah,
see
it
it now.
definitely ruined it.
People had to learn. And so HDR was the same thing. All of a sudden a director gets a camera and it's like, hey, here's HDR. And it's like, that's great, but they still light the scene the way that they were always going to light the scene. And they're not going to their wardrobe, group and saying, hey, go get the extra shiny sequins this time. Not the
Yeah.
dull ones we normally use, but now you can get the super rare shiny sequence. It's just that now HDR captures what was already there,
Yeah.
but it hasn't really changed very much how directors kind of operate. And then, as you pointed out, and we've talked about this before, some directors that try to embrace it without understanding it would do things like, point the camera at the sun to illustrate it's a bright day, and you're watching that on your TV, and it's painful to look at. Just to kind of understand its purpose. The way that I think about HDR is pretty straightforward. HDR is the little extra zhuzh that you get in a scene, right? It's the side dish that you order when you go to a fancy steakhouse. What really matters is the steak. That's what matters. The side dish is nice. It adds a little flair. It enhances the experience. But you would never recommend to a friend a steakhouse if the steak was terrible and the sides were amazing.
But the onions were phenomenal.
The onions are great. Steak kind of garbage. You should go there. Right? But you certainly might recommend a place that has the greatest steak ever, and you're like, the sides don't even bother. That's how directors still kind of operate. They're fairly conservative in kind of their training and their eye, what they're looking for. HDR certainly adds that extra sense of realism, because we're used to being able to see highlight detail and shadow detail when we look at things. And so when that is also reflected in the content, it helps with immersion. But it's certainly not this wild revolution in terms of filmmakers' toolkit. At least we haven't seen it.
Well, and that's when we spoke again off camera. When I first saw it advertised was when we had those optimizers. I think Sony did also have one where it would split the screen in half. And HDR looked like it was like a dynamic contrast almost. Mm-hmm. And then when we saw it implemented, a lot of us went from 4K Blu-ray to Blu-ray and said, wow, it's much darker. So it was a different message to each one, which leads us into this conversation is going to be all over the place. But I loved your analogy with HDR impact. And the reason why I love it, other than the fact we picked the same scene without even talking about it, was being a lover of LEDs, especially the legendary Z9D. A lot of us think that LEDs are disappearing with quantum dot OLEDs and obviously OLEDs. A lot of people out there that still love the HDR impact that only an LED can provide. I think your analogy on this particular film really detailed the differences between the two. If you can go and explain what you said to me about the feeling of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you that don't know, you probably don't because you haven't said it yet. We're talking about Batman versus Superman.
I'll put a picture of it on screen. When we edit it, I'll actually show a picture of it on screen, but go ahead.
So, and this is the scene where, Batman and Superman come together and they start fighting, and Superman has to fly himself up and use his heat vision to destroy, all of the turrets. And it's this slow kind of panning shot as, everything blows up and these fireballs are going all over the place. Now, quick side note before I continue, my understanding is that this is one of, if not the very first movie to feature a 4,000 nit grade, because the director, Zack Snyder, was like, let's push it to the extreme. Right.
Exactly.
So when I'm sitting there and I'm watching this, on an LCD television, and I'm sitting at kind of the recommended viewing distance, so it's nice and big and filling up my peripheral point of view. It gets to that shot, and I had a physical reaction because my eyes were telling me that's fire. I felt heat on my face because my eyes and my ears agreed that was hot. And so my physical body reacted, and I felt that heat kind of flush on my face. And it was an amazing experience to kind of have that the first time. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen anymore. I've looked at that scene too many times. But that first time, it was absolutely stunning. And I think that is an example of kind of HDR done right, or HDR impact, the way it can be used, because we're watching this scene. We're watching these two iconic characters go back and forth. And the overall movie is maybe too dark for some, kind of fans' tastes, in general, just how, Zack Snyder views and grades content. But that scene stands out, and HDR enables it to stand out. And then you can go back and you get these special kind of moments in a film that are impactful and memorable that add to the overall experience. If the entire piece of content is just floating around the 2000 nit, kind of point, then it's not special. It's not interesting. And quite frankly, it can be uncomfortable to look at.
Yeah, oh, yeah. Well, I mean, so that film, that scene is, well, I think too, with his style, the grain is a bit much. Sometimes he has that artificial grain, but that was a very clean scene. And when I first started kind of filming HDR to look at it, it would be also when he landed and when he split the grate and he threw them into the two guns, those guns smoking, the detail is one of the first 4K shots with HDR that I felt like it was three-dimensional. But I'll say that film and Pacific Rim on LEDs really popped for me. But then even on the best OLEDs, as much as the specular highlights, I think stars especially and jewelry, that HDR impact for me was less. Is that just my thought? Is that where peak brightness does still serve a purpose at 3000 nits, or do you think that's contrast ratio?
No, it's a great question. Peak brightness is what gives you that impact, right? Now, when you have an OLED television, it's not just about perfect black. It's about the micro contrast because there's no blooming. When we think of blooming, we always think about, white text on a black letterbox. But every pixel is blooming into every other pixel, right? It's just not as obvious. But anytime you have pixels sharing a light source, that's going to happen, right? And so when you're looking at an OLED image, there's this micro detail that's happening that adds texture and adds extra depth that you see all the time, which is nice. And I'm certainly not here to knock OLED. My bedroom TV is the A95K, and my living room TV is the X95K because
there you go.
Times a day, and then I got my projector in my theater room.
What's the projector, real quick? That's what's the projector?
That's the XW5000ES. I got a 130 inch screen. So
boy.
Playtime. But that impact that you get from HDR really is driven home by the highlights more than the shadow detail. That's just the way that kind of our bodies are kind of built. We have dynamic irises built into our heads, and so when you suddenly get a flash of brightness, there's a physical reaction you're going to have. Your pupils are going to constrict. So it helps to communicate a more intense sense than a little bit more shadow detail. Again, that's not to say that OLED doesn't look fantastic, because it does.
Of course.
But in just my experience living with these TVs every day, and of course my work with Sony, but I'll be watching a piece of content, in my bedroom when the Batman came out. Right.
Yep.
I went in there and I watched it on my 65-inch A95K OLED. It's dark. Robert Pattinson, the first time he comes out of the shadow, I'm like, oh, the black level is stunning. But then I went up, into my theater room, and projectors are not known for great black level. That's not what they do.
Very filmic.
Right. But it's 130 inches viewed from 12 feet away. And when I'm watching it there, I'm like, forget black level. This is the greatest experience.
Immersion. Yeah.
And then I go down and watch it on my X95, and all of the highlights are so much more impressive in the kind of the car chase scene where the explosion, those highlights are there. And I'm like, OLED is garbage and projectors are terrible. This is the greatest thing ever. They all have these very different strengths, and it's fair, as ultimately a customer myself, to say, this is the one I like. Maybe it's the one I like all the time, or maybe it's the one I like for a certain piece of content, but there are different feelings that you have from these different experiences. And when we talk about HDR expression, we're usually the thing we're most impressed by is the highlights, which plays into the strength of LCD-based televisions.
Which is great, because you just named the three different people types that we have in our communities. And I still fall, as much as I have all OLEDs now, I still fall into, I know we talked about the Z9D, which is one of the most classic LEDs. And you've mentioned too that, hey, look, I mean, your memory of that is better than, it was. But I remember you
It's
know,
right
I
there.
oh so so the Z9D was and I had the 940E. And I remember in my mind, this is again my memory, was that the blooming control was much better then. And you kind of reminded me, especially since the TVs I was watching were 75. You're like,
Right.
did you ever just lean off to the side a little bit? And I thought, no, I didn't really. But can you
Yeah,
see?
yeah, that TV was terrible for off-angle viewing. I mean, the contrast just fell off a cliff. The blooming was so bad; it was like you pointed a mag light at it from the front. It just lit up like Christmas. But that was kind of the price that you paid for that television. If you sat in the center, in kind of the hot seat, then you had this unparalleled experience. And that TV was really designed for customers who orient their furniture around the TV, because
Yeah.
that's what they're about. But if you're the customer that orients your furniture and then puts the TV wherever it fits, then maybe a different TV is the right one for you, right?
Yeah.
The off angle on the Z9. I mean, I still love that TV, but it was the TVs that we have today are so much better
Which
at
is
off angle control.
which is so interesting because we talk about that, the memories of that. But I remember if we look quickly at that lineup, we went Z9D, and then I remember the Z9F, which was kind of beat up a little bit because it had a different zone count or there was a bit more blooming. And then I remember very few people in the community saw the Z9G, which I spent a lot of time with at Roberts, which looked like a transformer. I loved how thick it was. I loved the
Oh,
legs on it. But can you speak a little bit to that signature changing a bit to where Sony really decided to start favoring shadow detail? Where when I would look at Samsung's content, guys handled it so differently. But would you say that they do have that conversation about the algorithm being, better to keep shadow detail versus just crushing the blooming or crushing the detail? That's
sure.
a signature as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that a lot of people talk about. So, with Sony's kind of guiding principle as being creative intent, right? If shadow detail is supposed to be in a scene, we want it to be in the scene. But sometimes, in order to reveal that shadow detail on an LED backlit television, then blooming is going to come along with it. Now, ideally, we can control that blooming as much as possible. But again, at our hierarchy of kind of importance, our own kind of Maslow pyramid, at the top is creative intent. So we will accept blooming if it gives us the shadow detail. Now, other manufacturers make other decisions. And I'm not here to judge a customer that has a preference as to which one of those they want to look at. But keep in mind that a different decision is being made. And sometimes it's hard to evaluate, kind of TVs side by side, because there's always an assumption that every manufacturer has the same goal in mind, right? The same kind of target. And that's not true. Sony's target is the reference monitor creative intent, and other manufacturers have their own definitions of what their target is going to be. So we certainly are continue to work on the algorithm to reduce blooming as we continue to reveal shadow detail. But that's kind of the stance Sony takes on it, is that the shadow detail is important. It's supposed to be there. It needs to be there for the scene. If blooming comes along as the price we have to pay to get that accuracy, then we'll pay that price. And other manufacturers have a different calculation. They come up with a different decision. And again, I already said this, but I'm going to say it again. If you as a customer have a preference for one of those two approaches, you're right. Whichever it is, it's the right one, because it's your money. So, you buy the one that makes you happy, but understand that they are not trying to be the same thing.
So in our conversations, especially at the shootout, we would be sitting there watching all the competitors. And I think what attracted me to our conversation more than anything was, if I didn't know you were from Sony, your conversation was so even keeled on what you liked from each one. You weren't strictly pointing out this one or that one. So to hear you, we talked about all the different approaches, just your thoughts as this isn't necessarily wrong, is something that I know we struggle with on YouTube. Is accuracy is king only in this way. You have to calibrate. When the majority of the people that buy TVs, it's why when I do any kind of review, especially a Sony review, is I tend to go through. Actually, don't even do reviews anymore. I do more first impressions, and then I stay with the TV throughout the year because firmware updates do change. We
Right.
saw, the VRR update from Sony kind of came out of nowhere last year, which we were all very pleased about. But to give a final review on something that's changing throughout the year, but I think your thoughts on, well, if you like it in your house, people then can really judge when I show standard, cinema, custom. I show all the modes, and then some can say, "Oh, I like that." Because I'll tell you honestly, when I see something like the Z9K, which I spent a ton of time with, and the Z9G, and sometimes when I see them calibrated, I say calibrated down. Only
Right.
because I'd love to see the Z9K go after a Z2 uncalibrated and say, look, run wild with that saturation or run wild. So I know we talked about that, but I love that you're still saying there's an audience that likes all the different ones and not one is considered correct because it's about what they like. And that's still, I think, so important for our consumers not to lose track of, that they can still have the flexibility of their own. There is no, and I said this to you off camera too, when I hear about who's the authority in TVs,
Hmm.
when I hear about that being an influencer or, oh, this guy knows it. When I talk to guys like you from all the manufacturers, I'm like, this is the guy that they have to hear from. Is for me, these are the authorities. And even the authorities telling me, hey, whatever you like is great. So it's so refreshing and
Don't get me wrong. I would love it if you all bought Sonys, right? That's great.
of course.
But
Yeah.
for me, at the end of the day, for me personally, right, and professionally, if you make the best informed decision as a customer, right, if you make the best informed decision for you, and I played a part in you being informed, whatever decision you make, I'm happy with because my job has been fulfilled to give you objective facts, to give you perspectives, to make things easier to understand. But people work hard for their money, right? Televisions are not, we're not curing cancer here, right? We're making TVs, right? Things that
Yeah.
you can use to enjoy some of your precious free time with. It's not that serious. It's a lot of fun. It's hard work, but let's keep it light. And if you make a decision that you're happy with, then I'm happy. That ultimately is what I want. What I push back against, kind of vigorously, is just misconceptions, misunderstanding. Certainly, there have been things in the kind of TV space, and again, I'm not here to throw shade at any manufacturer, so I'm not going to mention any, but there have certainly been claims or statements that I feel have been intentionally kind of obscure and allowed customers to draw conclusions that aren't accurate. And I push back against those things. What product you buy, what your needs are, what your preferences are your own, and they're fine, and you're right to feel the way you feel. I'm
Yeah.
just here to give you facts.
Well, and the challenge is, I guess, us as influencers, that's the best part and the worst part because our voice is out there. And I'll give you an example. Last year, I had reviewed and spent a lot of time with the X95K, and that was the 85-inch. And the minute I saw it, I was blown away. I put it right against the QD-OLEDs, and I thought it did amazing. And then other influencers had grabbed the 65-inch. So I think which ones are being reviewed, blooming wasn't as good on this one. And then that runs wild. And then what if that one's defective? So it's a good thing. And I have videos coming out soon. Are we a good thing? I'm not sure we are. We are good. And I don't know going forward. But I also want to say that meeting you and even seeing your 6'6", so
Yeah.
seeing you even on a panel and talking to the other manufacturers, you guys all know each other. All the guys have worked at other areas throughout the years. You have other engineers, and I've explained that in recent videos as like a fight camp. And when I see Sony, Samsung, and LG, those three are like the most respectable or respectful of the other big three. And it's a lot like talking to a fight camp because they don't talk any smack. And you're right. And what's cool about seeing you at the shootout is here you are towering over even me. I'm 6'3", and you're still so complimentary. And everybody's complimentary when I know you guys are all super competitive. Can I ask
Sure.
you, as somebody who I know is so involved in this, was not being at CES for you disappointing. Just as a person, as somebody who likes to get out there and show what you have, to me, I think it's a benefit for you guys to hang back and have your own. For me as an influencer, as much as I was disappointed, I'm more excited. It gives me more to cover next month.
Right.
And more digestible. For you, being somebody who I know is fiery, who's got a big presence, is that something you wanted to be at, or how do you feel about that, I should say?
Well, I have two answers for you. For me personally, I love CES. I love the crowds, the terrible state of the bathrooms, right? The shuttle buses from the strip. I love all of it. I have a great time. I'm super passionate about, the technology and the industry and the people, and I love to be in front of people and talking to people. So I personally was nonplussed that I wasn't going to have an opportunity to go for myself. In terms of kind of the strategy, the challenge at CES is there's a lot of things happening at CES. There's a lot of noise, and there certainly has been a consolidation over the years, even in the media space, right? Used to have like a major publication would have, one person dedicated for television and one person dedicated for, cars, and one person only did vacuum cleaners and one person did whatever. And now, because of this not only consolidation on the media side, but also the consolidation of technologies, you have very few people that have to cover a lot of information. And there's a lot of crossover from technology to technology. And so it's easy to kind of get lost in the kind of the din of CES. And so what we decided to do is very similar to kind of how Sony PlayStation kind of worked with kind of E3. It's like, that's great, that's fun, it's exciting, but we're just kind of one group there, kind of get lost. We're going to do our own thing. We're going to do state of play. It's going to continue throughout the year. We're going to have these conversations. And so we've decided to kind of take that tack with kind of our product announcements. And again, the byproduct is at CES, it allows us, to talk about, the fact that Sony launched a satellite, to talk about the fact that, a couple of years ago when we rolled out our EV the first time, every member of the media ran up to me and said, is Sony going to make a car? And I had to tell all of them, right now, we built a car so that we can learn about making cars, so that we can offer new solutions to people who make cars. Because right now, we give them a solution to a problem they tell us they have. But we can identify more opportunities if we learn how to build a car ourselves. So that was just Sony wants to learn more about this kind of technology, and that's who we are. Sony is a hardcore R&D company at its heart. When it was founded a few years after the end of World War II, the founding kind of partners at Sony, the idea was that the engineer, not the salesman, was the star, and it was the technologies and what you could do and kind of social responsibility, and that was kind of the whole concept behind the company. And of course, we've expanded. So there's of course Sony Pictures and PlayStation, and we offer lots of services. We're a huge financial player in Japan. Sony's got like a bank, but we are still, a bunch of nerds sitting around in lab coats, blowing stuff up as often as we make things that work, and just trying to bring new experiences and new technologies to people. That's what we do, and we love it. And we want CES to be more reflective of that. So I know it's a long answer to say that I wish I was there personally, but I'm excited to be able to share like the bigger Sony kind of story. I'll add one more thing to this, because I think this is important for perspective. Consumer electronics is cutthroat. It is, it is a dog-eat-dog world out there. Margins can be thin. It is not the way. If you wanted to become a billionaire, don't start an electronics company, right? It is not the way to do it. And there are other elements within Sony that are major profit drivers. Sony Music, Sony Gaming. We continue and persist in the electronics side because we love it, because we won't give it up. We don't care that it's hard. We don't care that competition is tight, that margins can be thin. We love to do it, and we're going to continue to do it.
And that's what us in the comments, I know, again, when we had the announcement, I was texting you anyway. And then we had the announcement that Sony wasn't going to be there. And it's so funny is that even though everybody that watches this channel are their technology nuts, it's like TV, gaming, projector, surround sound. That's all. They're like, cool, car, that's awesome. Even the PlayStation part, they were like, VR, that's great. We're the TVs. So it's such a passionate group. And I love what you said about it not being a money maker, the thin margins, I should say, is it reminds me of like Formula One or those race cars where the companies are like, well, this isn't our biggest money maker, but we're passionate about this. And it seems like with Sony, there's so many products. Same with, I would say, Samsung and the others. It's like to be so focused on the TV part, we are so passionate about these certain models.
Right.
And that's what everybody is so excited to hear about. And I know we'll have all that news down the road. For me, again, selfishly, I wish you were there just to hang out with you and
Totally.
to see you in your element. Because again, I've seen you, and I won't name your team without you naming your team. But seeing you guys in the back watching and engineering watching, it's like watching your kid. It's like a fighter watching your fighter in there. And how's your fighter doing in this scene and that scene? I wish, and maybe I'll do that more next year when we're filming some of the shootout. If you guys will be there, is I want to get more of you guys on camera, because it is like watching the most respectful yet competitive group. They're all there, and something about even having masks on a few years ago made it more ominous because you couldn't see, everybody was focused. It looked like a bunch of assassins watching. That was so cool.
It was spooky.
It was spooky. So yeah, we'll have a lot more obviously to talk about when it comes to Sony's lineup. I'm glad you're clarifying that they have nothing to worry about. It's not, because I think the comments were, oh my God, they have nothing this year, or they might take the year off, and that stuff gets crazy. So I was like, you do have TVs coming, right? You're like, yes, there is. I didn't just take the year off.
I'd love to take a break, but they won't let me.
Yeah, so that's why, I mean,
to a wall
you being on here is ridiculous as far as I'm concerned, because I've talked to plenty of marketing people, and you're talking about lab coats and the ins and outs. I know this is, I mean, you guys haven't even launched your lineup. You're working on everything right now. You take the time to talk to me, and it's amazing to me. Again, I'm starstruck. You know, you're my guy. It's a pleasure to have you on. But your knowledge and everything that you guys have talked to me off camera, I think, is really missing in our space. It's one thing to have a marketing person take what you say and say, okay, this is what Rob told me to say. And I dealt with that at CS, where I talked to a lot of people that knew what to say by the very surface level of, hey, this is our new product that does that. So I can't wait to hear directly from you Sony's lineup and where they're aiming. I got to know, our LEDs are safe, right? We're still going to have some LEDs? Because are they safe?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Sony has, you know, for the last couple of years, we've done kind of, you know, LCD televisions and OLED televisions. And people ask me this all the time. Even, some of our kind of retail partners will ask, okay, that's great. Thanks for the lineup. So which one is the flagship again?
Speak on that a little bit, Rob. Is that difficult for you guys, or?
Well,
Master Series is Master Series.
Yeah, Master Series is Master Series. It's not difficult from our perspective, but I completely understand why everyone asks me this question. And it's not just retail partners. You know, I'll have reviewers that are like, okay, so which is the flagship? And I'm like, that's not how that works. So for Sony, we essentially, our entry models are, LED based, direct lit. That's kind of what's happening. And then we step into full array, and then we step into mini LED. When you step into mini LED, you also can step into OLED, and then you can go from there into QD-OLED and, more zones, more control, more whatever, right? But we look at OLED and mini LED as kind of complementary technologies. They have unique strengths. They have areas where they perform slightly better than the other. And some of that, again, is performance, just hard and fast, objective performance facts. But we also recognize that some of it is preference. I would say that the vast majority of video files lean OLED, that whether they've been told to or they all came to that conclusion on their own. That does seem to be a general kind of consensus. But there are plenty of people that love TV and they prefer, an LCD, LED kind of experience. So we put our best technologies into both, and we say, depending on what your objective needs are, or depending on what your preference is, we have a platform that that works for you. I think it's unfair to say something as kind of generic as, well, if you have a light-controlled room, then you should buy an OLED. And if you don't have blinds, then you should buy, a mini LED or an LCD television. And I don't think that is even true. You can view an LED television in the dark, and you can view an OLED with the lights on. It has to do less with the ambient light, unless you're at the extreme ends of what I mean by ambient light. It has a lot more to do with kind of personal preference. The last thing I'll say regarding our professional monitors. So again, the reference monitor that's used by the industry is the HX310. That's the new version. So the BVM 300 and 300 Mark II, those are gone. Those were true RGB OLED panels, but those aren't made anymore. The new reference monitor, LCD. It's a dual cell LCD, but that is the reference standard. So saying that you can't have, an LCD being referencey is just not true. You certainly can. Again, there are differences, there are strengths. At the end of the day, I'm here to explain technologies and give people perspective. And then you look at it, and the one that you think looks the best is the one that you should think about taking home with you.
So we talked, great explanation, by the way, but I love that irony. You're like, oh, by the way, that's an LED. I think our plasma fight from plasma to LCD kind of trickled back into OLED. What I think is interesting now, I didn't mean to go here in this conversation, but I do find two things. What you said about the flagships, what's so important to people, especially that buy Sonys, is bragging rights, as we've talked about in the graphics card department. Bragging rights are today's hero, tomorrow's fool. So when you have people that went after, say, an A90J, I remember I got killed with the A9G, was the Master Series was a 2-year product. At least that's what people thought it was going to be. And they wanted to know, and especially in the comments, to say, look, I have the flagship. And then when I saw the Z9G, I thought, without a doubt, that's the flagship. It's the 8K Master Series. And then I think having a QD-OLED, the A95K. So for those watching, this is how I explain it. The X95 is the 4K flagship LED. Like the A80K I was like, that's not a flagship. That's so you see where it gets dicey. Then I would say the Z9K is clearly the flagship. So I totally get that. But for bragging rights, I guess it's whatever model group you choose, you have the flagship of the LED. So if you have a Z9K, that's what you chose.
Yeah, and I think that's the way you ultimately look at it, right? It's like, well, but even flagship among what? I can say, well, I have a flagship vehicle. Is that a Peterbilt truck or a Ferrari? Because two different groups are going to respond to that vehicle, very differently. Absolutely. If I pull up to my Ferrari, to my trucking buddies, they're like, well, how much can you haul in that? And I'm like, not a lot, right? I think that I completely understand the idea. The idea of, the kind of fear of missing out, the wanting to kind of be able to say, that I have the best. So I'll give you kind of one last piece of kind of my personal perspective. 8K is in some ways considered always going to be flagship because your 8K TV has like all of the things you can possibly put into it. Not just because it's the most expensive, but because of kind of what it takes to drive an 8K panel. The pixel pitch is very tight, so it requires a lot of backlight power to illuminate it. So they're also the brightest kind of television. So they kind of check a lot of boxes in general. And 8K is a great platform to watch 4K content on. That is objectively true, right? You can see a clear difference between, 4K TV playing 4K and an 8K TV playing, 4K content when viewed from a the recommended distances. They don't even have to be like 2 inches away. You can see those kind of differences. But at the end of the day, if you're not going to convince your OLED fans that your flagship, LED is any good, because they're going to be like, whatever, bro. My OLED is better. You can be king of your pile. It's tough to be king of pile over. And you brought up a good point about, kind of that fear of missing out. Should I buy a TV, now? Is it going to be outdated next year? Here's what I'll say to that. So FY21, we have the A90J, right?
Mm-hmm.
Crowned King of Television, incredibly well reviewed across the board. Phenomenal TV. That TV is essentially on par performance-wise with Sony's entry OLED in FY22, the A80K, right? So, yes.
I wasn't going to say that.
Right? So
I'll let you say that.
No, I said entry because I want to make a good. We only have 2 levels, so
gotcha. Yeah. You're like, I'm not making it crazy. Yep.
Yeah. Last is also second. But the idea is that you can jump in to kind of Sony TV technologies, and regardless of where you kind of jump, you're getting a TV that's got kind of the latest and greatest that we can put in at that price point, again, going down the path of creative intent. So while, yes, I can put the A90J up to the A95K, and I can see there are differences, between the two. The fact of the matter is, unless you put those 2 TVs side by side, you won't know that one is necessarily better, than the other. But if you're the customer that wants to go out and buy a new TV every year, God bless you. Tell me who you work for, because maybe I need to.
Well, that's our group. But I would say quickly about the Master Series. They just talk about the Sony tax and things are more expensive. But I will say, when you look at the A90J, its design, Z9K, there is something to be said about the design, the chassis, the body, the sound. And I always say that you are paying for that prestige as well, and be good with it. And to your point, the next generation will catch up. Quickly before we go, what I wanted to say too is that we had plasma versus LCD. Now it was LED versus OLED. Now we have LED versus OLED versus QD-OLED. Now you guys have both. And the reason I'm not talking more about even AK's future with you, or even QD-OLED going forward, is because I don't want to get into too much of what Sony's doing next year. So I don't want to get into that, but we will discuss that going forward. I do like that Sony has all 3, more so than just choosing to go with one or the other. Quickly, for me, seeing micro LED for the very first time, I've seen it on camera 1,000 times. When I first saw it, I was absolutely blown away, and I saw it from different manufacturers. Sony has its own version. Can you speak to me briefly, and then I'm going to actually let you go, because it's getting, I know you're in your busiest time of the year, but what's the reality of a micro LED, whether it's from Sony, Samsung? What's the real, I was blown away by it, but there's some very real hurdles for it coming to market.
Yeah, absolutely. Sony's technology is called Crystal LED. So we've had Crystal LED now for maybe 6 or 7 years at this point. Initially, it was primarily a commercial product only. So it's used kind of for both digital signage, but also we partnered with some automotive manufacturers so that they could create life-size 3-dimensional models of cars and then show them to like the executives with the paint swatches and be able to rotate them to scale without having to make an actual production car, right? That was kind of the idea, right?
Okay.
But since then, we've also now made them available to kind of consumer space or residential, kind of spaces. Let me start by saying this. The primary difference is when you are making a kind of standard television, you're making a large sheet of material. We call it mother glass in the case of, kind of LCD. And we set the pixel pitch. So how many pixels per inch is set when that's manufactured. And then you can cut, smaller screens out of that, and it all have the same pixels per inch. So we'll print a sheet, and we're going to cut out 55-inch TVs out of that. or 65-inch TVs or 77-inch TVs, whatever. The problem, or the challenge, I should say, with kind of micro LED, which almost always becomes kind of modular based by extension, is that the pixel pitch is fixed, especially with micro LED, because it's incredibly difficult to place those micro LEDs, to align them, to have them all oriented the right direction without one splitting off going this way and the other way. So there's kind of a minimum pixel pitch you can hit realistically from a cost manufacturing point of view. And so because of that, you have these fixed screen sizes based on resolution. And if you're not following what I'm saying, let me put it another way. If you wanted a 4K Sony crystal LED video wall, it is available only in 220 inches.
Perfect.
Because the pixel pitch is preset. So we just have to add inches until we get to all 4K. And if you're like, that's too big, I can only do 110-inch diagonal. Great. That is high definition.
Now, is that partially, Rob, why we've gone with, like, I'm going to jump real quick back to the X92 being 100 inches. And is that why that TV was 4K initially, for part of the same reason? Or, I mean, I love the TV, but I was a little surprised that we are going, the larger TVs are actually 4K.
Instead of 8K. And yeah, that's because that's what the panel material it was made specifically to do. It's also why once you get into these larger screen sizes, the cost goes up exponentially. Think of it this way, right? I print out, it's like rolling sugar cookies. You roll out some sugar cookie dough, and you take your smallest sugar cookie cutter and you cut 20 cookies out of it. Like, great. Well, what's the cost per cookie based on the ingredients? Pretty cheap. But at 100-inch, that's the whole sheet of cookie dough. Yeah. You can't get a whole lot of 100-inch screens out of that, which is why cost goes up exponentially kind of as size kind of goes up. There's not so much a problem with the yields. There used to be huge problems with yields, especially in early OLEDs, which also drove the cost up, because you were, for every TV you were buying, you had to pay for the 4 that they had to throw away, right?
Yeah, 77... I think 77-inch OLEDs initially were 15,000, then 12,000.
And so the same thing is true. A lot of those costs are associated with the panel manufacturing and kind of how much that can scale, how much waste there is. That's how that's all kind of related. So making a 100-inch 4K television is a specific thing to set out to do, because making that same thing in 8K would be also much more expensive as well. Yeah. So, as a manufacturer, we need to determine, what's the appetite, what's the real demand for this. Also keep in mind that typical kind of viewing distance, matters. Everyone wants a larger TV, but most average consumers in the United States view their TV at about 8 to 11 feet. That's about the distance people sit kind of on average. So if you use either the THX standard or the SMPTE standard based on that viewing distance, the standards are a little bit different, but I split the difference. Based on, 8 feet, you should be viewing an 80-inch diagonal in 4K. At 8K, it would be 160 inches, right? And so 4K 100-inch actually does typically makes sense, considering most people are sitting about 10 feet away. At that distance, you can't resolve the individual pixels, so it's not like the image is falling apart. 8K just allows you to do one of two things, right? Don't move your couch and go twice the size as a 4K, or move your couch half the distance and keep the same screen size. That's really what 8K allows you to do. And we're quickly, very few people are going to move their couch to 0.75 times the height of the picture height to maximize the 8K viewing experience. So 100 4K is actually kind of a killer size. Yeah. We recognize that there are customers out there that are more of the cutting edge, and they want the future. They want the concept of future proofing. Yeah, there's no real 8K content, but they don't want to be in a position where if it shows up, they're not ready. And so that's what the 8K TVs are there to do.
Well, to your point, being at the X92, the first thing people said to me was how soft was the image. I remember saying, well, one, I game 6 feet from an 83 inch, and I watch movies from 8 feet from an 83 inch, and I'm totally fine. But I love that description. Quickly back to micro LED. Is there a possibility that we will see it? Because at the Samsung event, I saw their massive sizes. And what they did say is they showed them down to a small size, but they were very quick to say, well, don't worry about what those are. So is that something you think we'll see at some point, or is that just kind of vaporware? Is it just more of a proto? Because obviously CES is full of prototypes. We've always talked about, even with E3. Is that still way down the road, do you think? For those that saw mini LED, they thought micro LED. I have people still waiting for micro LEDs. Reason why I ask, is that still very far away? Would you say?
It's tough to answer the question with a great deal of specificity, because there are things that I can't talk about. That's not to suggest that I can't say it, because we're going to announce it like in 2 weeks
tomorrow.
I can't you
heard it here first.
I can't even be talking about things that I know we're trying to get to in like 5 years.
That's why I didn't even write now. One, I'll let you know we're doing this without a script and without questions. I'm avoiding certain questions.
No, but it's fine. No, but I can answer it. So, but I'll give you kind of my perspective. Television. Here's my thoughts. Television, as much as we love it, and we love flagships, we like to say who's got the best TV. The majority of TVs sold are not that TV. Televisions are hyper commoditized. I mean, a customer will go out and spend, $700 on an iPad, and then you'll show them a 65-inch TV. They're like, "Can I get it for $200?" So that's really where kind of the bulk of the industry is. Micro LED is expensive to manufacture because it's difficult and it's time consuming. That's really the challenge. So when you're talking about the typical screen sizes that most customers use right now, from a manufacturing perspective, from cost per inch, LCD is the most affordable, and you get really good performance out of it, right? The LCD is not a terrible technology. It's very mature. We've had a lot of time to tweak it and continue to kind of squeeze improvements out of it, but that's kind of where the industry is primarily. Once you start to cross past, 100-inch, then you run into a logistics problem of shipping a television and transporting it. You can't turn in your hallway to get it down to your living room. It can't go upstairs and make the turn at the top of the stairs. I've heard of people having to cut holes in their house or have the TV delivered before the drywall gets put in so they can drop it in the corner of the house, and then they put the drywall in, right? So once you start to get to those sizes, then these modular TVs start to make sense. And modular TVs, I think, at least currently, are a better fit for micro LED as a technology, because the pixel pitch is set, it is predetermined, and so you can more easily scale up manufacturing and get the cost of manufacturing as under control as possible. But the idea right now of being able to go get a 50-inch micro LED or a 65 or a 100 or a 120 or an 82, the manufacturing isn't there yet to make that in any way, shape, or form palpable for the vast majority of consumers. The last thing I will say is this: Sony is not a panel manufacturing kind of company. We got out of that business a while ago. We got out of that.
Was Z9D the last one?
No, we did not manufacture the panel for the Z9. And the reason we got out of that business is we felt it made us beholden to certain technologies. Building a factory is a huge investment, right? When companies like Samsung and LG put down, $1 billion+ to open these factories, these are major commitments. So to a degree, you kind of really have to get locked in, and you're going to follow this path for a while because you need a return on that investment. What Sony prefers to do is to not be locked in. It allows us to be very flexible. It allows us to go out to different panel manufacturers and say, what do you have? What do you have that we like, that we think we can use, that based on our processing experience, we can extract high levels of performance out? Even if you just look at Sony's kind of consumer display products, we have LED, we have OLED, we have QD-OLED, We have wide color gamut, which essentially is our version of, a QLED or quantum dot based, LED. We have that. Then we have projectors, which all use, SXRD, which is a reflective LCD based product. Up until recently, we had both lamp and laser, now only laser. And we have micro LED in the form of our crystal LED. We have no consistency because each of those technologies has unique advantages and a unique place kind of in the firmament of consumer display technologies. Some are simply better in certain environments and for certain cases than others. And so while a lot of people look at micro LED as kind of this saving grace, here's what I can tell you. The Sony Crystal LED is awesome because it is an LED-based product. So you get very bright, to 1,000 nits peak brightness, perfect black, 180 degrees, which isn't technically true. I guess 179.9 degrees off angle view. You can't actually be 180 degrees and see the front of the screen. So great off angle viewing. You kind of get all that, but I did say 1,000 nits and I didn't go higher than that. You have modern, from Sony and from other manufacturers, LCD televisions that are 2,000 nits. You have some that are really pushing further than that. Sony doesn't disclose how bright our TVs are, but one reviewer at one point did measure a Sony TV close to 4,000 nits. Micro LED has some unique advantages, but so do some of our current, more consumer-friendly technologies. So I'm not to say I can't envision a future where it potentially happens. It's limited based on manufacturing, cost of manufacturing, and kind of panel output at this point. That's why it's still fairly niche in both the consumer and the retail space.
Well, it's fun to talk about. We are going to close with this because I think you actually just said it best. We talked about Sony clientele being a little nervous that you guys weren't there and having different panels. But if you do look at what you just said about creating a manufacturing process, LG is locked in with their WRGB OLEDs. They're locked in. They're doing a different lens. They have to stay that course. Samsung with the QD-OLED has their separate, but they're also locked in on quantum dot LEDs. And I didn't really think of it till just now. Sony is actually like, I'll take a little bit of that. I'll take a little bit of this. And it is, I looked at it as a disadvantage that they didn't make their own panels. But the way you're putting it, they can actually take whatever they feel they need. And going into this next year, again, without divulging anything or saying anything, it should make a Sony fan or purchaser, we'll call them fans, very confident because you guys can actually hang back and not choose one road to stay married to, where those other companies are. I know Samsung has this different Samsung display and electronics, and I've talked to both camps, and you guys are actually just kind of hanging back saying, I'll take a little bit of that. I'll take a little bit of this. And I think to have like an A90J from that other camp and an A95 camp being the same camp, it's actually the only ones doing that from what I can see.
Yeah. And I for me, it's been a strength for Sony. It gives us that kind of flexibility. We can take a look at the market and say, what is it the consumers are looking for? Again, because it's a commoditized market, most of the lineup's commoditized. Obviously, your flagship, you can kind of charge more by just saying it's our best, so it's
our flagship,
crazy.
And it is. I got you.
But for the most of the lineup, it's pretty commoditized. So consumers expect $1,000 TV and they expect like a $1,500 TV, but no one expects like a $1,182 television, right? That's not a price point anyone comes up with, right? So because we kind of have these somewhat locked in prices that consumers and retailers kind of expect, as well as general performance expectations based on those prices, we go out and we say, well, what makes the most sense? What can we use to deliver a great experience to that customer for that amount of money that's going down the path of creative intent and that we can take advantage of? We don't care about being the first one to necessarily do something. Like we brought out mini LED last year. Companies brought mini LED out 2 years ago. But most reviewers ultimately said that there wasn't a real big performance difference in the first generation of mini LED. It just was more zones, but they weren't necessarily doing a whole lot more. We took the time that we felt we needed to make it significantly better, right? How do we control, instead of dozens to hundreds or hundreds now to thousands of zones, to make a difference to the customer, rather than just saying, here's more zones, please give us more money, the performance is the same. That's not what we're trying to do. So it gives us that sense of flexibility, but it also then means we have, as we talk, kind of circling all the way back, we have these various kind of kings of TV of these various kind of kingdoms. There's the LED kingdom, there's the OLED kingdom, there's the 8K kingdom, and you have kind of these various crowns. And it's okay if you prefer one or the other. If you're like me and you have the ability to have multiple TVs and you want them for different purposes, that's great. You know, you'll always be happy with what you're looking at.
Well, didn't Sony develop the OLED in the 90s? Was there a small OLED from Sony?
If you'd given me more,
you don't have that. You don't have that in the room, do you?
Dig through my. Hold on. Just hold on.
You can tell he's tall. By the way, Rob, I'm not going to. Oh my gosh!
You mean the 11-inch true? Sorry, it's a little dusty. The 11-inch true RGB OLED.
Why do you live so far away? So that was what year was that?
Oh,
you said it's an RGB OLED. It's true.
Yeah, true RGB.
We're like aiming for that OLED. Now.
This thing, I think, if I remember correctly, it sold for $2,000. And one of the cool things about it is they announced it at CES and they said, when is it available? Today. Go across the street to Best Buy and go buy one.
Wow.
And it's speaking to my friends that were working at Best Buy at the time, the #1 most often stolen television in Best Buy's history.
Well, I remember hearing the specs on that and being like, wow. And then they're like, oh, and it's 11 inches. I was like, oh. And then to have LG be like they consider the father of OLED, I'm like, wait a second, I'm not sure that's accurate. I think Sony did it years and years before.
Yeah, you know, Sony has a lot of firsts in both kind of the consumer space and the commercial space. First manufacturer to do LED backlit televisions, although it was oftentimes Samsung gets credit for it because they called it LED. TVs had always been referred to based on the panel, never the backlight. So we continue to call it LCD television. I even had customers who would complain to me that they bought a Sony and they were told it had LEDs, but the receipt says LCD, and so they wanted to return it. And I'm like,
well, I think you guys were also first with full array, I think, to be commonplace, where it was edge-lit.
Full array was what we also did essentially a micro LED television called the Qualia 004, which was a 52-inch. That was
you have that one back in the closet or no?
Oh, that one I could not pull out. That's like 800 pounds. You know, so but again, as that kind of R&D kind of first company, we often like with this, the goal was to make, and we made this and we sold this. Yeah. And then what we learned after making it was, okay, RGB OLED is tough because the blue phosphor ages much more rapidly than red and green, and this is a problem. So from a consumer standpoint, you know, engineers ran ahead, and then afterwards we're like, we told everyone we wanted to make it bigger. Now we're realizing this is really hard. Yeah, then we transitioned it over to professional monitors. That was the good home because, quite frankly, James Cameron doesn't care if his $30,000-$40,000 monitor only lasts 2 years, because he spent $500 million on a movie. So that's less than he spent on paper cups.
Well, and you can see now, I will tell you guys watching this, it will be this long. I will not be editing it down or chopping it up because I think we'd be doing a disservice to the conversation. But I will say for you, Rob, not only being so generous with your time, if those of you that love Sony, Rob is in the mix right now. Busiest time for him. He's involved in all of the products that we know and love. He does not look stressed to me. Now, I'm sure he's tired. I'm sure he's busy, but he looks confident to me. So, and just the fact that you're taking this time with me It's over an hour. I'm just very, very thankful and grateful. But seeing how anybody else in any other industry is like, I'm busy, don't talk to me. You're like, because when we first spoke about this, it was a while ago, and then we spoke last week about possibly doing something together. I was aiming for middle of the year. I'm like, let you get done with get Sony, get the stuff out there. You're like, let's get it going soon. And it caught me off guard. I was like, you're going to be able to swing this now. So that confidence, and you're just looking at me chilling with the hair, totally confident. And that should make anybody who's into Sony, you don't look stressed to me.
Well, yeah, it's like a duck on a pond, right? You can't see what the feet are doing. Absolutely my pleasure.
I'm stealing that, by the way. Can't see what the feet are doing.
It is a busy time, but I really enjoy doing it, not just because of our interactions, Brian, but I think that this kind of ability to have a very direct kind of conversation with consumers about the things that they are interested in, about things they care about. And you and I talked before we even started recording. In this kind of environment, you're an advocate for your viewers, and so it gives you an opportunity to be their voice and to ask questions about the things that they care about, and not just rely on kind of PR kind of speak. There's a time and a place for that. It has a purpose. But I have enjoyed this so much, and quite frankly, I'm gonna let you know right now the offer is on the table. You want to do more of these? Just let me know. I'm happy to come back in and work through additional topics. Certainly, once the new products are announced, we can go through. We can get into that. But I'm absolutely thrilled to do it and have enjoyed it immensely.
Well, having you explain the lineup will be amazing. But to have it delivered straight from, one thing about being an influencer is about taking other people's information and regurgitating it. And there's way too much of that happening in the comments from other channels. To get it directly from the source, delivered the way you've delivered it, is personally so valuable to me, but so valuable to have it from somebody who knows exactly what they want to say, and from Sony itself. And it just, I'm beyond grateful, and I love hanging out with you anyway, but I'm going to let you go with that, Rob. Thank you so much for joining us today. This video will be this long. It'll actually be a little longer because I'm going to do a little intro for Rob. But thank you from me. Thank you from the community. And thank you from all the TV folks out there for just doing what you guys do. And give everybody at Sony the best from us.
I will do that. And thanks again, Brian. It was my pleasure.
My pleasure, man.
I've seen